Hey, this week on the Ferguson Home, Barie and I want to share our top 4 books of 2019. 4 for me and 4 for her.
Let's go.
Hey, this week on the Ferguson Home, we are excited to talk about some of our favorite books from the last year. Barie and I both love to read, and we read a lot of different kinds of books. And so we forced ourselves to pick our top 4 favorite books of the last year. This doesn't mean these books were written in 2019. It just means we read them in 2019, and they were some of our favorite books that we read. So I hope that you will join the conversation. What were your favorite books for 2019 that you read? Leave us a comment. Leave us a post on our social media feed. Let us know what you've been reading, what you've been enjoying. In addition, if you haven't subscribed yet to our Ferguson Home channel, we'd love to have you jump in and subscribe and follow along as we have these conversations with you. So we've got Barie and I, we've got our little puppy Rosie in this video. So Rosie, what was your favorite book of 2019?
So just give me a finger to chew on.
Barie, why don't you start?
Okay, so first book, and I'm going to say this one because it's one I'm still currently reading that I started in at Christmas time, which I do pretty regularly through my life, and that's Little Women. And actually, I started reading it before I realized that the movie was coming out in December. I just got it out because it was near Christmas and December time. But y'all, if you've never read Little Women, I just challenge you to go read it. And I actually, as I keep reading it, I tell Keith, I think almost every night, I read him a quote and say, I think I'm going to make this required reading for Brinley before she graduates from our house. So basically, it's just about 4 girls and their mom. Their dad's away serving in the war, and they're poor, and but they're content. And I just love how she really develops each of their characters, and you can relate to one of the 4 girls and their personalities, and just, I just think there's some really important life lessons in there. I don't want to give too much away, but it's worth a read. It's old school. It was written in the 1860s, I think, is what I told you, 1868 maybe. So yeah, it's old school language, but it is just the values that are weaved throughout it are so important to pass on to our kids.
That's good. Well, my first recommendation from 2019 is a book called The Underground Railroad by Colton Whitehead. And it is actually a historical book. It is graphic, it's violent, but it's because it's covering the era of slavery and the Underground Railroad. And what's interesting is he's kind of made a twist on the story where when they go through the Underground Railroad, they show up in different eras and times. And so it's kind of time travel. It's a little bit of like the railroad is an actual railroad that they get on and they go to a different place. But the characters are so well developed and the story is amazing and his writing is just so vivid. And so it really does grab your attention, grab your heart, and just reminds you just what a terrible sin slavery was and what a terrible blight it was on our country. All right, what's your second recommendation?
My second one, I never know if I'm saying her last name right, but it's Eleanor Oliphant. It's completely fine. And y'all, I love, in fact, my last 3 are all going to be about, I just love reading about characters that where they really develop their issues, but yet show their redeeming qualities. And isn't that true about all of us, that we all have issues and yet we all have such neat qualities, and those issues are what make us who we are and are actually beautiful, like as we learn to live in those and make the best of them. And so Eleanor comes from a really broken past, and she brings that into adulthood, and it definitely affects her as a person and how she relates to people. She's socially awkward, she's lonely, just all these things that are a result of her past, but yet she's a fighter, and it shows how human connection and human relationships are so important for our health. And so she ends up it just develops her character and who she is and all the good and the bad, and just what makes us human, and reminds us that we are also valuable, no matter our past and no matter just our oddities of our personality. That's what makes us awesome. So
that's really good. Well, my second book on my list is The Pioneers by David McCullough. And I think I've read almost everything that David McCullough has written. I loved his book about Harry Truman.
Yeah.
I loved his book on John Adams. His book,
was it Wright
The
Brothers?
Wright Brothers. His book on the Lewis and Clark
Lewis and
expedition
Clark.
was amazing. So I just enjoy his writing style. It's a nonfiction. It's history. It's really about the pioneers who first initially settled the Northwest Territories.
Yeah.
And I think, especially just telling you about the book about slavery, the Underground Railroad, the pioneers is so interesting to me because it was a pastor, it was a clergyman who was so instrumental in making sure that slavery was not instituted in the Northwest Territories whenever they began to be settled. And the whole trajectory of our nation was changed because of that decision.
Yeah.
And so I just encourage you to pick it up and read it. It's fast-paced. It's really exciting. And there's just so many interesting details to what life was like whenever, I think it's early 1800s, whenever that part of the country was first settled. So The Pioneers by David McCullough.
I love that a lot of yours are like history stuff, and a lot of mine are all relationships and humans and their characters. We have our 6-year-old that I homeschool wants to just say hi real quick. Come here.
Hi.
You got to get on it.
You got to come on so they can see you.
So I hope y'all are doing well.
Can I say my favorite book?
Sure. What's your favorite book? Maybe Charlotte's Web or Paddington?
Paddington and Charlotte's Web are my 2 favorite books.
Yeah, we have done some longer books with our younger ones, and we read the whole book and then we watch the movie, right?
Yeah.
So both of those are good memories for us. Okay, thank you. Okay, so my next recommendation is called Rush, and her name is Patton, I think, Lisa Patton. But it is about the South and sorority life and racial tension that is still strong. And so I just think it was a beautiful picture of, again, one of the characters in there just seems mean and into herself, and just some of the stuff she does very just racially driven, but yet her character's redeemed at the end, and she learns and she grows through it, and just a reminder there's hope for everyone, and that compassion, like if you can just lead out and change a whole movement of people when you lead out in compassion and love for all people. And so I just I love the insight. Even though I'm from the South, I didn't, it was a new world for me to read about that and understand all those dynamics. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Very good. Well, the third book on my list of my top 4 from 2019 is called Developing Female Leaders by Katie Cole.
Did you learn anything to help develop me? I need all the help I can
And so
get.
my first 2 recommendations were really historical books. My second 2 are church ministry leadership books that I really enjoyed this year. And Katie Cole's book, Developing Female Leaders, is just outstanding. And she is not trying to really persuade you theologically about what your position should be about women in ministry, what roles they can or cannot have within the church, and how you interpret Scripture and apply that in your context. But what Katie does so well is she says, whatever your theology and however you apply that in your local church, that you really need to make sure you are developing the female leaders within your context to be equipped to lead at a high level in the areas that your theology says they can serve in. And so she just gives so much information, both practically, financially, when you're hiring staff, when you're doing leadership development, about how to make sure that you're developing female leaders well within your church. And as a male pastor who's in ministry, and I've been working with men for so many years, and we've done all kinds of women's studies and women's leadership development over the years, but it just helped reinforce and it changed some of my thinking about things we need to do intentionally as a church to develop female leaders. So if you're a church leader out there, I just can't recommend her book enough to you, Developing Female Leaders by Katie Cole.
Yep. And as a female leader at our church, as a director on staff, I'm really thankful for the fact that you lead out in that area. And I feel like our church is really strong and just really helping to equip and encourage the females in our church to take leadership. So it's awesome. Okay, my last recommendation is called The Husband Hour. And so I have to tell y'all, I went back, I keep a wonder list, and every year it says, like last year, 2019 books read. So I have one that books I want to read and then books read, and I'll put them on there, and I'll put the month that I read it, and then the title of the book and the author. And then I just started towards the end in taking pictures of pages of the books that I wanted to remember quotes and stuff. So I'm new at that, so really I don't remember much about this book except for I highlighted it. Also in Wonderlist, you can highlight or bookmark those that stand out to you. So these are the ones that I highlighted, and I remember the husband hour just thinking, especially being in marriage ministry, that you need to read. It's a good read to remember to look for the good in your spouse and not get caught up in always thinking, finding the bad parts about your spouse. So that's all I can say about that I remember, but that I put it as I highlighted it as one of my favorite books. So most thought-provoking books, fiction books that I've read.
That's good. The last book on my list of top 4 of 2019 is a book about prayer called Old Past, New Power by Daniel Henderson. And Daniel Henderson leads a ministry called Strategic Renewal Ministry, which is all about helping pastors develop their prayer lives. And he calls himself a recovering leadershipaholic, and that resonated with me as somebody who's read lots of leadership books and how do you lead well and how do you organize the church. But often we can forget just the priority of prayer and spending time with God. So Daniel's ministry is all about how do we call pastors back to the priority of prayer and the Word in their ministry. In his book, Old Past, New Power, is just very helpful, very practical about how do you lead prayer in the local church. And so again, if you're a pastor out there struggling to know, not just in my personal prayer life, how do I grow, but then how do I actually lead prayer and lead other people to develop prayer in their own lives, I just can't recommend enough Daniel's book, Old Past, New Power. I think that you'll really enjoy it. So these are our top 8 books, 4 from each of us from 2019. We'll link to each of them in the show notes below, and so we hope that you'll check those books out and share with us what your top books were from 2019. We love you and pray you have a great day.